Hi, in this video I want to talk about how bad can things get? How bad do things have to get for people to recognize how bad life can be? And not only that kind of recognition, but how bad can things physically get? Is there any kind of temperament of any kind of hell that we can create on here if we can actually consider this reality that we're living in hell? And how bad do things have to get for people to recognize, not necessarily individually on each individual person's own, how much they're willing to accept in pain, their threshold of pain or suffering, and how bad things have to get, how many numbers to the death count, how many numbers to the torture count, how many people have to die of disease before people, or how bad, before people recognize, and how bad how bad can things get, and how bad should things get, how bad for the compensation that you will experience by having people finally recognize, have an existential crisis, and realize that this game is not worth living. How far do we have to go for the strongest threshold idiot, and I would say moron, emotionally incapable of understanding suffering, because he can't feel it. It doesn't mean you can't understand. Just because you can't feel it doesn't mean someone else, you shouldn't be able to understand that it exists in other people. And that in and of itself can make some kind of dissonance, some kind of pain in and of itself, recognizing someone else's pain. And I wanted to tackle another subject. I don't know if this one's a psychological subject but it's just a subject I want to tackle anyway in this video, and it's a small subject along with the other one, and it's this discomfort. We're always progressing towards something, and I think this is mostly psychological, so I'll include this as a psychology, like a one-off on the psychology kind of thing, and sort of like progression. We're always moving forward, always the movement and the progression based off this reality, the movement we're experiencing constantly on every moment we're living. Say the farther you get, say you're homesick, the more further away you get from home, the more painful it is. And I think obviously this could be used as a metaphor for something, but obviously you're obviously moving towards, I'm more at risk for, getting in a car accident because of the way I'm transporting. I'm further away. If I want to experience anything, if I want to die, I want to be at my house, or I want to be at home. The further away you get, the discomfort of this movement, this progression, not just on the level that we experience life. Obviously, we're experiencing life, and we're movement, and the very movement that we experience causes the suffering that we're experiencing, and obviously that can have an effect. So yeah, we're uncomfortable, and we're experiencing pain, and obviously that allows for some kind of pain. Progression, we're moving further away, and I don't know if this it obviously stems from some kind of psychology, but also recognizing the reality that we're living around is that we're experiencing some kind of this progression. Say you have an emotional attachment to something, the further away you get from it, the further away you feel like you're abandoning something. Maybe, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but it's an idea. The further away it gets, the more you're willing, but in the moment when you're experiencing it, the more you're unwilling to want to let it go. You don't want to forget it. You don't want to have it be more in the past, recognizing that the more in the past it is, the more it's stuck in the past of time. Say that you can reverse an illness, but if it wait too long, you go too far away, the more of a drive you have to go for the cure, the more like you feel like you couldn't have been there for them or for someone that's dying of an illness. You have to drive to get the cure, that you can have been there for them if you end up failing, and if you have it's like a sense of failure, and you have to have a sense that you're moving. That obviously the risk you take. Obviously, if you're willing to go and drive out and get the cure for the person, obviously you're taking the risk of not being there. That the cure may not work, and not being there for the last moment. They may not survive long enough for you to bring the cure back, for this progression that you're moving forward, moving away from something that you care about, and the fleeting moment of experience, and this idea that based on a specific event that you're experiencing can be discomforting, I guess, as a state of mind, and it can cause a lot of problems, and it can go back to the point of how bad things can get. Things can get bad in the state of mind, and how bad things physically can get. Can a black hole tearing you atom from atom, according to science, to our idea of black holes? Can that literally rip you atom from atom, and can that be the most painful experience, psychologically speaking and physically speaking, as a whole, your whole body? Can that be the most miserable experience anyone can possibly experience? No matter what, is there some kind of limit to the pain, being ripped apart atom by atom? Is that the worst pain you can possibly experience? Or every atom being consumed by fire and burning to death, or being consumed in a vat of acid, or some kind of pain, being eaten alive, which is like by atom, I wouldn't say being ripped apart, but I'd say it's more like a burning sensation, a stinging sensation, an aching sensation. I wouldn't necessarily say is how bad things can get, but how bad physically. But going on to how bad, not necessarily physically speaking, but how bad things have to get for people to start recognizing how recognizing the truth that we're living in. How bad does it have to get? How many holocausts do we have to experience before we start recognizing the game that we're playing is not worth living? And it's obviously, it depends on the person. It depends on a whole group, mob mentality. If you get a group of people together and one person agrees on the lowest common denominator, one person agrees that only two people have to die, and that person's the leader, or then the two people next to him agree with that as well, then everyone might start cheering for that. You never know. It's about this mob mentality, associating yourself under some sort of leadership about what this person says, memes, how the celebrity, the person that you look up to, the powerful being, the person that has, the star mentality, starstruck, how much that controls people's perception, and how much they're willing to accept in terms of a cost, and how much they take that person's saying, and how they take that and use it and almost in a way cover themselves with it and make it their own opinion. So depending on that, how bad things can get from a personal perspective and people's perception can obviously be something that is variable, and if obviously it depends on the person, and if the person looks up to a lot of people, the person, if they don't have necessarily a tendency to think for themselves, they can rely on their, obviously, hopefully the people they look up to aren't as crude and as callous and completely unaware of the suffering. Whatever aspects you want to apply to it is them. Hopefully they're looking up to someone, that, looking at someone and taking their opinion to heart towards someone that's greater than them, that's understanding, that's more empathetic. They just don't happen to be, and they happen to live vicariously through that empathy in someone else. And maybe if in recognition, maybe that person didn't mention that aspect of their life until they did mention it, all of a sudden that becomes a person that looks up to them, and that becomes their opinion, the person that looks up to the person's opinion. So yeah, obviously it has a lot to do with playing psychological word games, having people admit and almost in a way confuse their own thoughts that they're confusing themselves with, and almost have them admit the truth that they're in denial of, that they're not admitting. And I think it has a lot to do with semantics and coming to terms with the reality we're living in. But how bad do things have to get in general is a good question when considering how bad do things really have to get for people to start understanding what we're doing here, and how bad things have to get before we push the red button and say goodbye. This game isn't worth playing anymore. And I would argue, based on the experience that we've already experienced, it's not worth playing anymore. It doesn't matter how good it gets in the future. The compensation, you're always changing. You're always making up for the negative. It doesn't matter how good it gets in the future. You're not making up for all the deprivation that happens to get to that future, let alone all the millions of years that have led up of the evolution of animals eating each other, all sorts of horrible things, mass extinctions, things living up, going through the same process again and again. It's not worth all of the deaths that happened before then. Neither is it worth the buildup of progression to reach it once you start recognizing that's what you're trying to go towards. It's not even worth the compensation and compensation by the negative it took to create it, because it took more negative, and negative is the very definition, the game that we're living by, because all we'd be doing by compensating is taking people away from these negatives, and without these negatives, how are we going to achieve these positives? Unless you play some kind of psychological word or psychological game where you take a pill where you're constantly in a good state of mind, which I would argue is obviously you're not even aware of yourself anymore, because your very definition of awareness is based off of understanding the negative and the positive, sort of like drugs. You experience a high off of a drug, but it doesn't matter if you're not, doesn't matter how high you get off of a drug or how whatever, the drug's gonna wear off and you're gonna need more and more. You're gonna have to deprive yourself, go off the drug a while so the drug has more of an effect. Sort of like using drugs as an example of how good you can feel. And then it's not. You can argue against drugs too, because you can eat. You need more and more drugs to satisfy the same desire. You need more time in between. You need more experience the reality of life that we're experiencing no matter what. We're experiencing something no matter what, and we need to make sure. And we need to. And we're obviously gonna. We need to make sure we understand that no matter how good things get, no matter how much of a democratic process we're going to have, I mean, at that point, what are we going to be talking about? What are we going to be finding interesting? Well, once we take care of all the practical problems in reality, we're going to be looking at, tabloids for this or that, or something to make news, make something relevant, something rational, create new memes. It's all going to be about the deprivation game. Once we eliminate illnesses, but obviously we're not going to eliminate all these deprivations. We're not going to eliminate the ability for you to actually get your arm cut off in a sawmill or something. All these things are still going to exist, and without their existence, what's the point in existing? It doesn't matter if we're living in a virtual reality. Just to replay the same old thing over and over again. It doesn't matter how good things get, because the deprivation that led us to that virtual reality to begin with is already enough in the way to take away the compensation, the negative compensation. We're never reaching anything but a zero. We need the negative, create the positive, and all the negative that existed beforehand doesn't, and the goodness that exists in the future doesn't compensate for all the negative that existed beforehand. They reach us towards some side of societal thing because we're just chasing the same things, chasing the same cheese. We're just playing this desire game over and over again. And that's all we're doing. Satisfy desire. Take the amnesia pill. Satisfy desire. What's the point? What are you living for? You just live 2 hours, then forget it, and then it's like you're a goldfish or whatever. You only know 2 hours, and then you forget. And then you only know 2 hours, and you forget. Or at least the idea of you have 3 seconds or 10 minutes of memory, then you take the forget me pill, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, where am I? Obviously, this isn't a practical solution. It's not a solution that would work anyway, because there's not a solution where we can, apply that in a controlled environment where it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes. How much am I going to forget? I don't know. I can just assume that maybe 2 grams of this medication will get me 5 minutes, but who knows? It might backfire. But practically speaking, and other than some kind of virtual reality, and there's no practical way of obviously taking care of that, and obviously some kind of virtual reality which is, I would consider, impractical. Obviously, getting to a virtual reality, you can criticize all sorts of things leading up to some kind of virtual reality, but it's impractical. Obviously, the forget me pill, what are you accomplishing in this virtual reality? You're just doing the same thing over and over again. How are you gonna forget, and how are you gonna not know you're in a virtual reality without having all these things happening to you? How are you gonna not know that you're just satisfying some kind of hunger game? Oh, I'm stuck in a virtual reality now, and it makes all the more apparent because I realize that I'm not doing anything but satisfying these desires. How am I going to satisfy these desires over and over again without knowing I'm in a virtual reality? How are all these little idiosyncrasies, all these little things, these little complications going to prevent me from understanding some kind of virtual reality? So just the whole idea of creating something better in the future, we're stuck. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We're stuck between two, world-sized. We're going around in a halo, in a circle, whatever, and we're between two 500, world-sized titanium walls, and there's nothing we can do about it. Diamond, titanium, some indestructible force. We can't do anything. We're stuck in the game, no matter what. And the practical effect of the compensation based off these positives will not compensate for all the negatives we experienced in the past, because obviously we just be experiencing the. Obviously, practically speaking, you can't experience a positive without experiencing some kind of negative. And the idea of creating a negative beforehand and not knowing, surprisingly, that you've laid it out, but how would you lay these things out without knowing you're in a virtual reality? I guess this has turned into kind of a virtual reality video. and how you need the negative to experience the positive, the negative, all the in the past, led up to the positive in the future. Obviously, it's a positive based off of a negative, and we needed the negative to experience the positive, and all of our experiences is the positive, which is a zero sum. We're reaching some kind of closeness to zero. We're just going on the scale, going back and forth. Otherwise, how would we feel the difference? We're going on a scale, up and down, and you need the down to have the up and the up to have the down, but the down is the preface of the game, and we need to go down to feel the up, and that's the satisfaction that we feel on this game. That's what makes life worth living, is experiencing the up from the downs, and the downs make the ups. That makes the life game almost not worth living, because you need more of a down to experience more of an up. Practically speaking, virtual reality wouldn't make sense, because you're in a virtual reality. If you didn't know, how are you controlling all these mechanisms going on in the virtual reality, other than some kind of, constant state of mind where everything's just constantly moving. Every individual thought you have, everything's just changing based on your perception, based off of what outside stimulus is controlling your perception, other than the stimulus created by the virtual reality. So virtual reality would have to be a self-feeding mechanism, which wouldn't work if it's based on your perception and things you're thinking about. It wouldn't work that way, because you have nothing to work off of other than your thoughts in the virtual reality. And if you're going based off your thoughts and everything's coming true, you're in a virtual reality anyway. So it doesn't matter, and it doesn't compensate, because all you're doing is chasing lesser negative and avoiding a greater negative, and it's not worth it. It doesn't make life worth living. It practically makes it completely obsolete, and it doesn't make it worth anything. And the build up based on the negative events, based on the past events we've experienced, doesn't make anything like that worth living. So how bad does it have to get? I don't think it has to. It has to get by certain standards, different levels of bad based on the individual. Mob mentality. If one person, especially a leader of a group, says this is not worth living, then everyone will say it's not worth living. Satisfying desires, and we're not really achieving anything, or we're not accomplishing anything by any reasonable standards of the recognition of reality that we're living in. So yeah, we're just moving towards a brick wall, and we're already there to a certain extent. All it takes is one crazy to take advantage of this technology and things like that to completely annihilate it. And practically speaking, something like virtual reality wouldn't happen, because it couldn't be properly sustained in a controlled environment properly without some reasonable mechanism that's controlling it automatically that wouldn't find a way to screw the whole mechanism up anyway. We're heading towards a brick wall. I'd argue that we're already at the brick wall. We're just sort of in the process of cascading with it and trying to face away from it. But at that point, we're still going to hit a brick wall, and not noticing we're hitting a brick wall may help mitigate against it, but we're not doing anything but mitigating against it. We're going to end anyway, and that's all there is to it, and there's nothing we can do about it. We're not going to live out some Star Wars or some kind of Star Trek fantasy where we have the thing that makes everything we want, and it's not going to practically work. There's always going to have to be some kind of economy of trade and understanding some kind of value when it comes to precious commodities such as our consciousness and sentience, especially with the trading and recognizing a value outside of ourselves. There's not much in the way of motivation and having this game go on anyway. So I think I covered all my points. It was a blathery video. I went on different subjects, and I might go on individually on different subjects later on, but I mentioned virtual reality, movement, something like psychology, along the lines of psychology, and how bad it has to get on a physics level, and based on the universe we're living in, and on an individual level, how bad things get, like being ripped by an atom and things like that, how bad it can get being burned alive. Mob mentality, how bad does it have to get for an individual, how mob mentality can control that mentality, how virtual reality is not sustainable, all these, doesn't matter how good things get, it doesn't compensate for the negative in the past. And yeah, there's not much to sustain this game other than we're hitting a brick wall, and let's hope that we hit the brick wall or the steel wall, and hope that we don't splatter too much blood all over the place. Let's hope that we try to hit. How about this? Let's go head first, that we end it instantly, and we don't go at feet first, so we get crunched together and we sit there in agony for several hours before we end up dying. Let's not have a war over. Let's just end gracefully, as best we can, once we realize that this life game is unsustainable based off of this technology of recognition, the technology in and of itself helping the recognition of this game that we're playing. So I think that's all I need to mention, and I do appreciate it, and I hope I made everything coherent enough So I mentioned about 4 subjects in this video, so I might go off on a limb on some other videos and individualize these subjects, but that's it for right now, generally speaking. So I do appreciate it, and thank you, and until next time, goodbye.